Today we're going to talk about how we can create our own animation rig inside of 3ds Max. In other videos we've talked about the biped system, the character animation toolkit system or CAT, and now we're going to talk about how we can create our own. First, let's look at bones. In order to create a bone or a bone system, we're going to go into our Create tab because we want to create something. And it's found under our Systems tab, just like biped, but instead we're going to go to Bones. Now here, inside of our bones, we have different parameters, like the size of our bones here, the width, height, and taper. We have bone fins, which we can use if we want to use side, front, or back fins, and this can help us to know what direction our bones are facing. If you would like to do that, you're more than welcome to. So I'm going to start with a leg. So what I'm going to do is go into my left view. Either I can hit L on my keyboard, or I can right click and choose left. And so what I'm going to do is start with coming to an area and creating a bone. I'm just going to left click somewhere and let go, and then drag my bone where I want it to be. So I'm going to give my leg a little bit of a bend. So I'm going to, when I get it to where I want, I'm going to click, again, left click, click for my foot, and then I'm going to say, when I get done creating the bones that I want, instead of left clicking, I'll right click. And I'm going to end this little nub. I'm going to use that for my toe. So what I have here is a basic leg. If we don't like the look of it, maybe this bend is a little bit too much, then I can go into my bone tools and edit this bone. So to get to my bone tools, I'm going to go to Animation, Bone Tools, and then I want to go to Bone Edit Mode. So I'm going to click Bone Edit Mode, and I know it's active because it's blue. Then I'll select that bone, and I can move it. And when I get it how I like, maybe I want to move this bone backwards a little bit. And this toe, maybe my foot's too big. When it's how I like, then I'll go ahead and turn the bone edit mode back off. Now there's a lot of options in here that we can talk about, but for what we're going to do, we're really not going to mess with any of them. We could create a rig like a cartoon rig where we could have bendy arms and stretchy arms, but just for the basics of what we're going to do, of just creating a basic animation rig, we won't touch on any of that. Okay. So what I have here is what's called an FK system, or a forward kinematic system. If I look at my Scene Explorer, what I see is I have these 4 bones that are in a hierarchy, with this top bone being the parent to bone 02. Bone 02 is the parent of bone 03, and bone 03 is the parent of bone 04, or 004. So this can be a little confusing, bone 001, bone 002, whatever. So what I'm going to do is go through and name what these bones are. So I'm going to say this bone here is going to be my upper leg. Then I've got my lower leg. Then maybe my foot. And my toe. Okay, now we can see that just as we would see in a real body, my toe is connected to my foot is connected to my lower leg, and my lower leg is connected to my upper leg. This is an FK system, or forward kinematic. When I move one object at the top of my hierarchy, everything below it moves. Just like if I come down in the hierarchy, everything underneath it moves. And this used to be how animation rigs were. FK systems, but we've since evolved past that into what's called an IK system, or an inverse kinematic, where I can control objects lower in my hierarchy and it will affect bones higher in my hierarchy. So I'm going to create that. What I'm going to do is choose my upper leg, go to my Animation tab, go to my IK solvers because I want to create an IK system. And for this, I'm going to use a limb solver because my leg is a limb. So when I click that, again, again, 3ds Max is asking, what is it that you're wanting to do? What are you wanting it to connect it to? So I'm going to say this foot here. Now if we move what's called an IK solver or an IK chain, it will move my leg much like a real leg would move. And this is great in that it moves it, but if we notice that foot, it's still kind of moving in whatever direction the lower leg is in. What we're going to start doing is creating controls that will allow us to move our leg and our foot and everything else however we want. So what I'm going to do first is create what I call a master foot controller. And keep in mind that this is how I do things, this is how I like to do things, but if you can imagine it, there's a way to do it. If you don't like the way I'm doing something, then that's fine. You're able to do it. If you understand it, you can do it how you want. So I'm going to create a shape, and I created a rectangle, and I'm going to render it in the viewport. That's basically going to give it thickness. Maybe make that a little thicker. And I'm doing this so that I can see it easily in my scene. And what I'm going to do is name this. So let's name it Master Foot Control. Okay. And ultimately what I want to be able to do is to move this master foot control, and my foot and my toe and my leg and everything else will move with it. But I also want to have smaller controls in here, so like to control the foot by itself or control the toe by itself. So I'm going to come back in and create another rectangle. I'm going to set this up in a certain way. And then I'm going to create one here for my toe. So this is the basic setup that I have. Now I'm going to set up this pivot for what's going to be called my foot control. I want to set my pivot to where my toe and my foot meet, and I want to do that for a specific reason. So let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about why. At some point we're going to see why. So I'm going to try to I'm just going to eyeball it on where my foot and my toe meet. And I'm going to turn that off so that when I rotate my foot control, instead of it rotating from the middle, I'm actually going to rotate it from the front. And you might already have an idea why we're doing it this way. And I want to do the same thing with my toe control. I want to change its pivot to where that toe and the foot meet. So when I do that and rotate my toe, it rotates there as well. Okay, now one thing to keep in mind is that I have bones and I have controllers, and I want them to have a different hierarchy, which means I don't want my controller objects to share the hierarchy of my bones or vice versa. I want them to be separate. And the reason why is because if I were to use this for a video game or a movie and I had to export these bones out of 3ds Max, I want to have a hierarchy that is just bones, so I don't have to worry about these controllers being exported as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put these controls in a hierarchy. So I have my master foot control, my foot control, and my toe control. And if you have more than one toe, then obviously you would have more than one control, or more than one toe bone and more than one toe controller, or you could use wiring parameters that we covered in another video. So what I'm going to do is take the foot control and the toe control, and I want those to be children of my master foot control. So I'm just going to click, and now they are children. So if I move my master foot control, my other controls move with it. Control Z. I also want this IK chain, which I'm going to call my, we'll leave it IK chain. I want it to be a child of my foot control. So I'm going to open up my hierarchy until I see foot control. My IK chain, I'm going to click and drag to foot control. So now it's a child. And now we're going to see why we had our rotation, our pivot, at the front of our foot control instead of in the middle where it is by default. So if I rotate here, we can see that my IK controller follows with it. But what we also see is that our foot bone still doesn't move with it. And this is where our constraint is going to come in, the constraints that we saw in another video. So I'm going to select my foot bone, come to Animation, Constraints, Orientation Constraint, because I want to change, or I want to control the orientation or rotation of it. Click Orientation Constraint, and I'm going to choose that foot control. And when I click this, you're going to see something that you're not going to expect. And that's that our foot was rotated 90 degrees, and that's because our rotation between these two objects is different. But to change that, because I want it to follow along how it was before, I'm actually going to go into the Motion tab, if I'm not already, with my foot bone selected, and I want to keep initial offset. So that's going to rotate it back where it was. Now what we'll see, if I rotate my foot control, is my foot rotates with it. And if I come and look at my entire leg, we can see this is a lot like if I were to rotate my foot so I'm standing on my toes. So that's why we moved our pivot to the front of our foot control, so we could have this motion right here. So just like I did an orientation constraint from the foot to the foot control, I'm also going to do an orientation constraint from the toe to the toe control. So Animation, Constraints, Orientation Constraint, Toe Control, and keep that initial offset again. And now my toe will rotate as well using my toe control. And my master foot control still controls everything. I can still move my entire foot, which moves my leg. Rotate if I want. So now we can control our leg, but what we see is that there's no way, if we were to, for example, want to rotate this knee outwards, we don't have a way to do that. So let's correct that. What I'm going to do is create another control, and for this I like to do a circle. You can definitely use whatever you want. And I'm going to align my circle to my leg. To do that, I'm going to select my circle, come up to Align, click it, click my leg, and by default our XY and Z position is set. I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to mess with my X, Y, and Z rotation axis, but I am going to rotate 90 degrees so that I'm perpendicular with the ground plane, and then just move it on the y-axis in front of my knee. So this is what I have. Then I'm going to come back to that IK chain, go into my Motion tab, and under IK Solver Properties I have a swivel angle and a pick target. So I want to click on None because I want to pick a target, and I'm going to pick my control. And what we see is it doesn't look like anything happened. But if I move my control, now we can see that my lower leg, my knee, is rotating to look at it. So if I were, for example, to come and move my foot upwards, and I wanted to move my control so that my leg is pointing outwards, and I can do that. And then we can take our control, and as it is, it's going to stay still. But just for the sake of trying to get it so it will move with everything else, I'm actually going to make it a child of my master foot control. I'm going to toggle my Scene Explorer, and I'm going to name this Knee Control. And then I'm going to make it a child of my foot control, rather my master foot control. So wherever I move my foot control, my knee controller goes as well. So that's the first video that we're going to go over, is creating our own rig. Next we'll talk about our spine, and possibly the spine including pelvis, spine bones, neck and head, and then possibly the arm as well. But until then, try creating this right here, a leg. And try having that move how you want it to. And until then, have fun.